The bar was called Meridian. It occupied the 43rd floor of the Harrington Tower, a glass spine that cut the downtown skyline in half. The elevator opened directly into the space, no lobby, no bouncer, no warning, and the transition was so abrupt that most first-time visitors stopped at the threshold and instinctively straightened their posture. The ceiling was high and dark, strung with amber fixtures that cast light like late afternoon through amber glass. Jazz moved through the room with the same confidence as the people inside it, unhurried, deliberate, certain of its own importance. Daniel Hayes had been sitting at the far end of the bar for 40 minutes. He had chosen the seat carefully corner position, back to the wall, clear sightline to both the elevator and the secondary stairwell exit. Old habit. The kind that does not fade. He wore a charcoal Henley, clean but not pressed, dark jeans, and boots that had been resoled twice. His watch was a Casio F91W, the kind that cost $12, and keeps time with the reliability of a Swiss instrument. The man to his left wore a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than Daniel's car. Neither man acknowledged the other. The bartender, a young woman in a black vest, who had learned within 30 seconds of Daniel's arrival that he was not going to order bottle service, and who had adjusted her engagement accordingly, had set down his bourbon with the particular brand of polite indifference reserved for guests who would not be generating a significant tip. Single pour, well bourbon, which was the cheapest thing on a menu that treated the word affordable as a minor insult. Daniel didn't mind. He had been in rooms where the cheapest bourbon told you more about who you were dealing with than any handshake, and he had learned to read price points the way other people read body language. He sipped slowly and watched the room the way he had once watched rooms for a living, not paranoid, not aggressive, but present in a way most people had long since forgotten how to be. Present was a skill, it turned out. Most people were somewhere else, while their bodies sat at bars and tables and attended meetings they were in the past, or rehearsing the future, or composing messages to people who weren't there. Daniel had trained the somewhere else out of himself years ago, in the service of work that required his full attention, and had never quite managed to train it back in. He was always here. It was both his best quality and his most isolating one. He was 38 years old and looked it not in a broken way, but in the way that certain men accumulate experience in their faces like sediment, each year leaving something additional that did not diminish the structure but added to it. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he almost smiled, which was not often. His jaw carried 2 days of growth, careful enough to suggest intention rather than neglect. He was lean in the way of someone who stayed physically active not out of vanity but out of necessity, the way a person stays sharp when sharpness is the only thing standing between order and chaos in a household that contained one adult and one 7-year-old with strong opinions about penguins. The table of investment bankers 3 seats down had already dismissed him. He had watched the assessment happen, the quick scan, the minor recalibration of attention, the return to more interesting conversations. It had taken approximately 4 seconds. Daniel had counted. He was not offended. Invisibility had its uses, and he had spent enough of his professional life being exactly as visible as he chose that the involuntary version felt almost restful. His phone buzzed on the bar top. He glanced down. A voice memo from an unsaved contact, identified simply as Lily, home. He pressed play and held the phone slightly away from his ear so the sound would not carry. The voice that came out was small and extremely certain of itself, which was both an accurate description of the memo's contents and of the person who had sent it. Daddy. I finished my chapter. Mrs. Patterson said my report was the best one in class. Also, Biscuit knocked over the plant again. The big one. I put it back, but there's dirt. Okay, bye. I love you. Bye. There was a pause, and then, as an afterthought, the dirt is kind of everywhere. Daniel set the phone back down on the bar. Something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes that was more private and more honest than any smile he might have produced for the room around him. It was the expression of someone who had arranged their whole life around a single essential priority and was, at this particular moment, being reminded that the arrangement was correct. He typed a short message back. Good work on the report. The plant's been asking for it. "I'll be home by 10. He put the phone away. The ice had mostly melted in his glass. He considered ordering another and decided against it. He was not here to drink, not really. He was here because the childcare arrangement for the evening had fallen through at the last minute, then recovered, and the sudden 2-hour window of absolute aloneness had felt so foreign that he hadn't known what to do with it, except come somewhere that required nothing of him. A burst of laughter erupted from a booth near the window, a man in a navy suit gesturing expansively. His audience of 3 leaning in with the attentiveness of people who understood which laughs were worth giving. Daniel's gaze moved across the room without stopping anywhere in particular. The elevator opened. He registered the change in the room before he consciously identified the source of it. It was subtle, a slight shift in the ambient noise level, heads turning, the particular silence that precedes something taking up space. Daniel tracked it without turning his head, using the bar mirror with the same practiced ease of someone who had spent years not wanting to be seen looking. She walked in alone. Sophia Calloway moved through Meridian the way weather moves through a room, not aggressively, not even particularly quickly, but with the certainty of something that does not require permission to occupy space and has never learned to ask for it. She was 34, though she would not have answered that question in any room where it was relevant to negotiations. Her dress was midnight blue, structured at the shoulder, and she wore it the way she wore most things, as if it had been selected with the same precision as a legal document. Every element chosen, nothing accidental. Her hair was dark and pulled back at the nape of her neck, which served the dual purpose of looking intentional and keeping it out of her eyes, which were currently doing a great deal of work. The financial press had written about her hair, once a profile that had spent 4 paragraphs on her appearance, before arriving at the acquisition that had prompted the story. She had kept a copy in her desk drawer for 2 years. Not out of vanity or grievance, but as a precise reminder of what she was working against every day. She no longer needed the reminder. The lesson had become structural. Sophia was the founder and CEO of Callaway Capital Group, a mid-market private equity firm that had, in the 11 years since she had started it, with borrowed money and institutional audacity, grown into one of the most closely watched investment operations on the eastern seaboard. She was profiled. She was quoted. She was occasionally called a disruptor, which she considered faint praise, and occasionally called ruthless, which she considered a compliment that people meant as a criticism. She was also, at this particular moment, acutely aware of the 3 men sitting in the private booth at the far end of the room. They had been expecting her since 8 o'clock. It was now 9:14. The delay had been intentional. She had learned early that arriving late to a room where you were outnumbered shifted the psychological balance in ways that arriving on time never could. But the delay had not changed the fundamental geometry of the situation, which was this. Winston Garfield, the CFO of her largest portfolio company, had spent the past 6 weeks engineering a hostile restructuring designed to dilute her voting stake. The documentation was complex, the legal language labyrinthine, and the timeline deliberately compressed. The 3 men in the booth were his allies, his lawyers, and, if she signed what they put in front of her tonight, her new board partners. She had not come to sign. She had come to buy time to be seen, to project control, to communicate through body language and social geometry that she was not surrounded, that she had something behind her. The problem was that she had arrived alone. She had asked her CFO of record, Marcus Webb, to meet her at 9. He had texted 20 minutes ago, "Family emergency. Can't make it." "I'm sorry, Sophia." She had read the message in the elevator, absorbed it, and made 3 decisions in the 12 seconds it took to reach floor 43. The first decision was not to show anything. The second was to go in anyway. The third was to find someone in this room who could stand next to her and look like he belonged in her orbit without actually belonging to it. She had swept the room in the first 4 seconds. This was also old habit. She had been reading rooms since she was 22 years old and had walked into her first boardroom as the youngest person and only woman present, and had understood before she sat down that the room would be read for her whether she participated or not. Most of the occupants were immediately disqualifying. The investment bankers were known entities. Anyone in her industry would recognize them as adjacents who would dilute rather than reinforce her position. The tech founder table near the window was too young and too loud. The man at the corner of the bar was... She stopped. He wasn't looking at her. In a room where every other pair of eyes had tracked her entrance with varying degrees of calculation, the man at the end of the bar had not turned. He was looking into his glass with the specific quality of attention of someone who was thinking about something real, not performing disinterest, not playing it cool, genuinely, completely elsewhere. Sophia Calloway had not encountered genuine disinterest in approximately 4 years. She crossed the room toward him. She did not sit. She approached from the side and leaned in slightly, her shoulder at the level of his ear, and said very quietly, "I need you to be my fiancée. Starting right now." He did not startle. He did not recoil. He turned his head slowly and looked at her with dark eyes that processed the request with the calm of someone reading a weather report. "How long?" he said. Sophia blinked. It was, she realized, not the response she had scripted for in any version of this moment. She had prepared for confusion, offense, flattery, proposition. She had not prepared for a timeline inquiry. "Tonight," she said. "Or until I'm clear of this room." He looked at his glass. Then at the mirror behind the bar. His eyes tracked something in the reflection. She didn't turn to see what. And he was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "What's the threat level?" "Corporate," she said, "not physical." "Okay." He set the glass down and turned on the stool to face her fully. "One condition." She straightened slightly. "Which is, nothing tonight extends past this room or affects my daughter." Sophia absorbed this. She had been in hundreds of negotiations. She had heard conditions designed to extract leverage, to establish dominance, to create reciprocal obligation. She had never heard a condition that was simply, plainly, about protecting a child. It was, she thought, the most honest condition she had encountered in this building in years. "Agreed," she said, and meant it without reservation. He stood. The physical change was immediate and startling, not because he grew or altered in any way she could point to, but because the space he occupied rearranged itself. In the bar stool, in the ill-fitting context of this room, he had been invisible. Standing, he was not. He stood with the kind of stillness that very physically competent men sometimes carry, not aggressive, not posed, but consolidated, like someone who had long ago made peace with the exact amount of space his body required. He extended his hand not to shake, but to guide. "Tell me who I'm looking at," he said quietly, as they moved toward the center of the room. Far booth. 3 men. Winston Garfield, CFO of Westerfield Holdings, my portfolio company. He's trying to push through a restructuring that hands board control to his partners. The other 2 are legal. Westerfield, he repeated, and said nothing else. The room was watching. Sophia felt it, the particular attention of a space, recalibrating around a new variable. "What's your name?" she said. "Daniel Hayes." She filed it. "Sophia Calloway." "I know who you are." She glanced at him. "And you didn't come over. You hadn't asked," he said. They reached the edge of the VIP area, a tiered section, elevated by 3 steps, curtained at the sides with dark linen, populated by the kind of people whose assistants made reservations that didn't appear on any publicly accessible booking system. A hostess materialized. Sophia was expected. The addition of Daniel was absorbed without comment, though his clothing was photographed with a brief, professional glance that registered and filed him in a category she had not opened before tonight. Daniel placed his hand at the small of her back as they ascended the steps. The touch was light, and certain the touch of someone who had done this before, though not recently. It communicated possession without aggression, presence without performance. It was, she thought, the most precisely calibrated gesture she had felt in years, and it required nothing from her in return. The effect on the room was measurable. The 3 men in the far booth shifted. Winston Garfield, a compact man in his mid-50s, with the careful grooming of someone who thought about his appearance primarily in terms of how it read to people above him, watched them approach with the expression of someone revising a calculation. He had arrived tonight, expecting a woman under pressure. The woman currently crossing the room did not appear to be under pressure. She appeared to have backup. The backup appeared to know where he was going. The man to Garfield's right, younger, in a charcoal suit, leaned forward and said something in a low voice. Garfield's eyes did not leave Daniel. Miss Calloway. Garfield rose, extending his hand with the particular warmth of someone who had spent 40 years making warmth a competitive tool. We were beginning to wonder. You know better than that, Winston. She took his hand briefly. This is Daniel. She did not offer a last name. She did not offer a title. She simply presented him the way one presents something that requires no introduction, and the deliberate ambiguity of it landed in the booth like a stone in still water. Garfield would spend the rest of the evening trying to identify the ripples and finding nothing but more water. Daniel, Garfield said, and extended his hand. Daniel shook it. Said nothing. This, too, was a choice. Sophia registered it. In rooms like this one, silence was not emptiness. It was pressure. Garfield's handshake was firm in the way of someone who had used handshakes as an instrument for long enough that firmness was now automatic. Daniel's was simply present. Neither softer nor harder. Just there, they sat. The booth curved around a low table on which 3 folders had been arranged with the neatness of a trap laid carefully. Sophia did not look at the folders. She looked at Garfield. You said you had new terms, she said. Refinements, the younger lawyer said. We think you'll find them. I'd like Daniel to take a look first, Sophia said. Garfield's expression was very good. He had spent decades cultivating it. But something crossed it too quickly for most people to catch that was not quite comfortable. Of course, he said. Daniel reached forward and opened the first folder. He did not touch the documents beyond that. He scanned the top page, turned to the second, and stopped. His eyes moved left to right twice. He sat back. There's a clause on page 4, he said. Section 12. Subsection C gives the restructured board the right to appoint the interim CEO in the event of a CO. He paused, just slightly. Prolonged incapacitation or absence of the current executive. The table was quiet. That's standard protective language, the younger lawyer said. The definition of prolonged in this document is 72 hours, Daniel said. He looked at Garfield. A 3-day business trip. An illness. A scheduling conflict. That's the threshold. The booth was very quiet now. Sophia had read the documents. She had not caught that specific clause because the word incapacitation was buried in a section that cross-referenced a paragraph on page 11 that cross-referenced an exhibit that was 42 pages deep. She was excellent at reading contracts. She had missed it. The man beside her had found it in 30 seconds. She kept her face still. Garfield said carefully, That language can certainly be revisited. The whole section needs to come out, Daniel said. Not aggressively. Pleasantly. Almost. Not revisited. Garfield looked at him a long, assessing look. I didn't catch your background, Daniel. I didn't offer it, Daniel said. They stepped away from the booth 20 minutes later, not fleeing, not in victory, but in the practiced withdrawal of people who have made their point and are giving the opposition room to decide whether to press it. Sophia guided them toward the curved bar at the room's perimeter, a secondary station away from the main floor, where the lighting was slightly dimmer and the ambient noise slightly lower. She ordered water. Daniel ordered nothing. That clause, she said, low. I read those documents 3 times. It was designed not to be found, he said. The cross-referencing was deliberate. Someone with legal training wrote it to survive a first read and a second read. It only shows up on the third if you're specifically looking for it. I was specifically looking for it. You were looking for a hostile takeover mechanism, he said. You were scanning for the obvious play. This wasn't the obvious play. He paused. They weren't trying to take the company tonight. They were building a mechanism to do it 6 months from now. Maybe a year. Sophia set down her glass. How do you know this? Because if they wanted it tonight, they wouldn't have invited you to a bar. They'd have filed. She looked at him for a moment. Who are you, Daniel Hayes? He said nothing. which was by now becoming a familiar pattern, not evasive, exactly, but selective. He answered what he chose to answer, and declined the rest without apparent discomfort. "You understand corporate governance," she said. "Legal strategy. You read that clause the way someone reads something they've written variations of before. I've been in rooms like this one," he said. "Past tense, past tense," he agreed. "What changed?" He looked at the bar. Not avoiding her, just quiet. The jazz had shifted to something slower, a piano piece she didn't recognize, and for a moment the room around them felt like a stage set from which the actors had temporarily stepped away. "My wife died," he said. 3 years ago. Cancer. Lily was 4. He said it evenly. The way someone says something they have had to say enough times that the words have worn smooth. "I was running a corporate intelligence operation at the time. 22 people, 3 cities, clients I can't name, and none of it." He stopped. Started again. "None of it was worth being in a hotel in Hong Kong when she went into hospice." Sophia was quiet. "I wrapped up the operation over the next 6 months. Liquidated the assets, paid out the contracts, gave the clients enough transition time not to burn bridges. Then I moved somewhere smaller, took a job doing security consulting for a regional firm, and raised my daughter." "And the bar," she said, "tonight? My neighbor was supposed to watch Lily. She got held up. By the time the schedule sorted out, I had 2 hours, and I didn't know what to do with them." He looked faintly rueful. "I picked badly." "You picked fine," Sophia said, and surprised herself by meaning it. He turned to look at her then directly. Without the social management she was used to receiving from men in her industry, the careful calibration of attention designed to communicate something about power, or interest, or advantage. He looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they are genuinely curious about, not because solving it serves them, but because the problem itself is interesting. "Why didn't you have backup?" he said. "Someone in your corner tonight. You're running a $100 million operation and you walked in here alone." The question was precise. It found the exact place where she had been avoiding looking, not because she hadn't known the place was there, but because she had gotten very efficient at not stopping there. "My CFO had a family emergency," she said. "Your backup plan for your CFO?" "Was the CFO?" He nodded slowly. Not judgmentally, more like someone confirming a hypothesis. "I built the company alone," she said. And she heard in her own voice something she did not intend to offer a note of explanation, rather than defense, the voice of someone justifying a choice to an audience that had not asked for a justification. "For a long time, alone was safer. Alone meant no one could be leveraged against me. No one could be turned, or scared off, or used as a vector into operations I needed to protect." "How many people work for you?" he said. "At Callaway?" 43. "And you trust none of them with the situations that matter most." She opened her mouth and closed it. "That's not." She stopped. "It's more complicated than that." "Probably," he said, without any particular emphasis, not pressing. Just leaving the door open, she looked at the bar. The piano piece had moved into its second movement, slower, more deliberate. The kind of music that suggests a conversation happening between two people who are not quite ready to say the essential thing. She thought about the 43 people at Callaway Capital, and about which of them she had briefed on the Westerfield situation, and came up with 2 names, her legal team lead and the assistant who had managed her schedule that day. 2 people out of 43. "I'm aware it's a structural problem," she said. "It's a solvable one," he said. "And the solution isn't walking into Meridian and recruiting a stranger from a bar stool," she said. "Probably not a repeatable strategy," he agreed. "But it worked tonight." She looked at him. "It worked tonight," she said. At the booth, something had changed. Garfield had excused himself briefly just a moment, and had stepped toward the room's quieter perimeter with his phone already raised. His 2 companions leaned together and spoke in low voices. The younger lawyer pulled up something on his tablet. The search was cursory, which was a mistake. Daniel Hayes, as a search term, produced exactly what Daniel Hayes had intended it to produce for the past 3 years. a trail of ordinary professional history that tapered to near nothing around the time he had deliberately allowed it to. A consulting firm, a few conference appearances in the mid-2010s, a LinkedIn profile updated twice in 4 years. But the third man in the booth, the older of Garfield's legal team, a 60-year-old named Bernard Crane, who had spent 30 years in corporate litigation and had once, in a previous decade, worked adjacent to a defense consulting operation he now preferred not to remember. Bernard Crane recognized the name, not from the LinkedIn profile. From a different kind of memory, he said nothing. He put down his own phone and looked at the far corner of the bar where Daniel Hayes was talking to Sophia Calloway, and he was very quiet for a long time. Garfield returned. Nothing on him. Small-time consultant, semi-retired. Yes, Bernard Crane said. So, he's a prop. She picked up a stranger to make herself look. Winston. Crane's voice was measured. I'd like to suggest we revisit the timeline on this filing. Garfield stared at him. We've been building toward tonight for... I'm aware of the timeline. Crane folded his hands on the table. I'm suggesting we revisit it. Because of him? He found one clause. He found it in 30 seconds, Crane said. And he described the legal architecture behind it. He didn't just read the clause. He explained the strategy behind the clause. That's not a real estate attorney moonlighting as someone's date. He paused. Walk carefully, Winston. That's all I'm saying. Garfield looked across the room again. Daniel was not looking back. He never looked back, Garfield realized. He never needed to. At 11 o'clock, Garfield made his move. It was not the move Sophia had been expecting, which meant, she reflected, that Garfield was better than she had given him credit for. Instead of the documents, instead of the formal pressure, he stood and walked to them at the bar and sat down on the adjacent stool with the casual confidence of a man who believed he was resetting the board. Sophia, he said, warmly, as if the booth had never happened. I want to apologize for the evening's atmosphere. Winston turned to look at you both. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Did we? Sophia said. I want to be direct with you. The restructuring. I know it looks adversarial. I genuinely believe it protects the company's long-term interests. Yours included. The clause on page 4, Daniel said. Garfield turned to him. As I said, that language can be revised. You had 4 months to revise it before tonight, Daniel said. The document was finalized 8 weeks ago. I'd estimate this particular draft is the 4th iteration, probably the 2nd since your legal team's October revisions. A silence. October? Garfield said carefully. The formatting conventions changed between the first version and this one. The exhibit numbering skipped from D to F, which means Exhibit E was removed somewhere in the revision process. That usually happens when a version is reviewed by outside counsel who flags something. My guess is the original mechanism was even more aggressive and Crane talked you back from it. Daniel paused. Did I miss anything? Bernard Crane, still at the booth, had gone very still. Garfield stared at Daniel for a long moment. Something had happened to the warmth in his face. It had not disappeared. But it had reorganized itself into something more careful. What, Garfield said, exactly, is your interest in this? I'm having a drink, Daniel said. It was, Sophia thought, the most devastating answer possible. She set down her glass and straightened in her seat and looked at Winston Garfield with the particular clarity of someone who had just been handed a door she had not previously seen. Winston, she said, I'm not signing anything tonight. I'm going to take the documents to my own legal team. I'll have a response to you by end of business Friday. She stood. That's not negotiable, and I think we both know it's reasonable. Garfield's jaw moved slightly. Thank you for the evening, she said. They took the elevator down to the street level together. Neither spoke until they were outside, on the wide pavement in front of Harrington Tower, where the city moved around them with the indifference of cities at 11 at night. The air was cool. Sophia pulled her coat slightly closer, a small, unguarded gesture that she made without seeming to notice. Daniel stood beside her and looked at the street. You didn't have to do that, she said. The exhibit numbering was useful. I mean all of it. She turned to face him. You didn't have to be any of this. He looked at her. You needed someone in the room. I needed a prop, she said. That's what I thought I needed. Someone to stand next to me and look like they belonged. She paused. That's not what you were. No, he agreed. She studied him in the way she studied things that didn't fit her existing categories carefully, without urgency, giving the information time to settle into the right place. The operation you ran, she said. Corporate intelligence. What does that mean, exactly? It means I knew what people were going to do before they did it, he said. It means I read rooms, read documents, read behavioral patterns, and helped clients understand what the person across the table from them actually wanted and what they were actually afraid of. And what did Garfield actually want? He wants control of the Westerfield asset before it hits its 5-year performance window, Daniel said. If the company hits the numbers it's projecting in Q2, the valuation doubles. Right now, with your current stake, you get the majority of that value. If he restructures before Q2, he captures it. Sophia was quiet for a moment. And what was he afraid of? Daniel considered. You, he said simply. She absorbed that. A cab moved through the intersection. Somewhere to the east, a siren rose and faded. The city provided its usual background evidence of itself. My wife's name was Caroline, Daniel said, unprompted quietly, almost to himself. As if the city had earned the confidence. She was a pediatric occupational therapist. She worked with kids who had sensory processing disorders, motor delays, kids who were struggling with the basic mechanics of existing in their own bodies. She was extraordinarily good at it. She had this way of making children feel like their difficulty was a puzzle she was interested in, rather than a problem she was managing. He paused. Lily was 4 when Caroline died. Old enough to remember her laugh. Not old enough to remember much else. I've been trying to fill in the rest. How? Sophia said. Photos. Stories. Keeping some of her habits alive. Caroline was particular about bread, actually. The same criteria Lily applies now. He almost smiled. I think about that sometimes. The things that survive. She looked at him. The city was indifferent around them the way cities are indifferent in the good sense. The sense that means it makes no demands on you, that you are free to be whatever you are in the space of it. After she died, I thought for a long time that the way I'd been living the strategic mind, the operation, the rooms like the one we were just in, I thought that was who I was, and I had to figure out that it wasn't. It was something I did. Who I was turned out to be considerably simpler. Simpler, Sophia said. A father, he said. Mostly. She looked at him for a long time. Do you miss it? The work? The rest of it? The rooms? The she gestured vaguely. Being the person in the room who sees everything. He thought about that. No, he said. I don't miss being important. I miss being good at something. He paused. Tonight was the first time in a while I was good at something other than helping a 7-year-old with her book report. Sophia smiled. It was small and unexpected and entirely different from the expressions she had worn inside Meridian. Those had been composed, arranged, deployed. This one simply appeared. Was the book report hard? She said. It was about penguins, he said. Lily has strong opinions about penguins. I learned more about emperor penguins than I will ever need. That sounds, Sophia said, considerably more useful than tonight. Friday arrived in the manner of things that are anticipated carefully, slightly earlier than expected, and carrying weather. Sophia had spent the intervening 48 hours in a way she had not spent 48 hours in a very long time, not managing the crisis from the outside, but working from the inside of it, the way the crisis actually was, rather than the way she had framed it. The distinction mattered. For 6 months, she had been reading the Westerfield situation as a threat to be deflected. Daniel had helped her see, in the space of one evening and a glass of bourbon, that it was a trap to be dismantled, and that the dismantling required her to look at the people around her differently, not as variables in an equation she was running solo, but as potential allies in a system She had been too isolated to navigate fully. It was, she admitted to herself somewhere around 2 in the morning on Thursday, a fairly fundamental recalibration for someone who had built an entire professional identity around the independence model. She had spent the intervening 48 hours with her legal team, a 3-person group she trusted, which was a smaller number than most people in her position maintained, and a deliberate choice working through the Westerfield documents with the specific attention that Daniel's observation had made possible. The clause on page 4 was the headline, but it was not the only problem. There were 4 others, each graduated in severity, each designed to operate in sequence. She had found them because she now knew what she was looking for. She had also made 3 calls that she had been avoiding for 6 months. The first was to the institutional investor who held 12% of Callaway Capital and had, on 2 occasions in the past year, been approached by intermediaries she had not been able to identify at the time, but now, with certain contextual information in place, could trace directly back to Garfield's network. The second was to a former board member of Westerfield Holdings who had left quietly 18 months ago and had, it turned out, left with documentation. The third was to a securities attorney who specialized in fiduciary breach cases and who listened to Sophia for 11 minutes before saying, "I'll need the documents, but what you're describing is textbook." The meeting on Friday afternoon was held in the Callaway Capital Conference Room on the 27th floor, her ground, her terms, her table. Garfield arrived with Crane and one of the associates. He was wearing the same careful warmth. He had not recalibrated. Sophia presented the materials without preamble. The investor contacts. The former board member's documentation. The legal analysis of the page 4 clause and its 4 companion mechanisms. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform anger. She laid the information on the table, the way Daniel had laid his observation about the exhibit, numbering plainly, precisely, without decoration. Garfield's careful warmth underwent a series of revisions. Bernard Crane, to his credit, went still very early and stayed that way. "I've spoken with the institutional investor," Sophia said. "He's withdrawing his proxy agreement with your group. I've also spoken with my legal team about the fiduciary implications of the restructuring as designed." She paused. "What I'm proposing is this. We table the restructuring. I agree to bring 2 independent directors onto the Westerfield board, your choice from a list I'll provide, and we revisit the governance question in 18 months, after the Q2 window has closed." Garfield was quiet for a long time. "That's not," he started. "It's what I'm offering," Sophia said. "It's also, I think, considerably better than the alternative." She looked at him steadily. "You built something sophisticated, Winston, but you built it to survive a single read. And it got a very close look." The meeting lasted another 20 minutes. When it ended, no documents had been signed in either direction, which was, her attorney later confirmed, precisely the right outcome. The restructuring was effectively dead. It would take another filing, another timeline, another architecture, and by then, the Q2 numbers would be public and the leverage would have shifted. She walked back to her office and stood at the window for a while, looking at the city. She found his number through a route that required more effort than she would have expected. He had been correct that his digital footprint was minimal, and the corporate intelligence firm she might once have retained for this kind of search was no longer the instrument she wanted to reach for. She found it eventually through a referral from the kind of source that doesn't appear in search results. A person who had once worked adjacent to the operation Daniel had described, and who, upon hearing the name, had said quietly, "Oh, Daniel Hayes. Yes, I have his number." She sent a text message. "The Q2 numbers should be interesting. The restructuring didn't survive the week. Thank you." The response came 90 minutes later, which she suspected was not because he had missed the message, but because he was in the middle of something that took priority. "Glad it worked out. Good reading the room with you." She looked at that for a moment, then typed, "I'd like to return the favor somehow. Dinner. If that works. Not a bar. 3 minutes. Lily has a standing arrangement on Saturdays. Could do Sunday." She typed, "Sunday works." She set the phone down and looked at the window, and thought about what he had said. "Who I am" turned out to be considerably simpler, and thought about what it would feel like to be considerably simpler, to have arranged one's life around a single essential thing, rather than around the 100 necessary ones. She did not arrive at a conclusion, but she thought about it for longer than she had thought about most things in the past year. Sunday arrived in the manner of things that are not anticipated but arrive anyway. Quietly, through the window, with early light that had the quality of something that does not require your attention, but is there regardless. She had chosen the restaurant carefully, not Meridian, not anything that occupied that register of performance and audience. A small Italian place on the east side that was loud in the warm way of rooms, where people are genuinely enjoying themselves, and quiet in the pockets, where genuine conversations happen. The kind of place where the tables were close enough together that you occasionally heard something real from the people beside you, and where the lighting was neither dramatic nor institutional but simply warm, like an argument that had been settled some time ago. She arrived at 7. She was not late. She had considered being late, not strategically, simply as a function of her own uncertainty about what this was, and had decided against it. If she was starting a different kind of calculus, she might as well start it at 7 o'clock when she said she would. He was already there. He was wearing a blue shirt, clean and pressed an upgrade from the Henley, though she had found the Henley oddly appropriate in retrospect. He was reading something on his phone that he put away when she sat down. Not with the performance of someone doing courtesy, but with the actual attention of someone who was done with the phone. The phone was done because the thing worth paying attention to had arrived. The sequence was that simple, and it was more disarming than any opening line she had been offered in a very long time. "How's Lily?" she said. He smiled, the one that lived around his eyes. "She wanted me to report back on whether the restaurant had good bread. She has opinions about bread. What's her verdict criteria?" "Crusty outside," he said. "Soft inside. And it has to come to the table warm. She's willing to accept exceptions on the temperature issue, but not the other two." Sophia looked around and flagged the server. "Can we get the bread quickly?" she said. "I have a review to file." The server, young, cheerful, unfazed, nodded and moved away. Daniel looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize. The one that was not quite amusement and not quite surprise, but something between, something that said, "You are not what I expected," without saying it. She had earned that expression from him twice now. She found, unexpectedly, that she wanted to earn it again. "I called 3 people I should have called 6 months ago," she said. "I heard." How she stopped. The source in the securities firm. "You moved fast," he said. "That's not a criticism. It felt obvious," she said. "Once you pointed me toward the right question." She leaned back slightly. "That's the part I keep thinking about. I had all the information. I was in those documents. I missed it because I was reading for the wrong thing." "You were reading for the attack," he said. "It's natural. When you know someone wants to take something from you, you look for the place they're going to grab. You don't always look for the tripwire 15 feet behind you." "Is that a metaphor from experience?" "From a lot of experience," he said, and the slight shadow that crossed his face was not grief exactly. It was older than grief, more integrated. "I spent years reading the rooms of people who had everything and were terrified of losing it. After a while, you start to understand that the fear of loss does more damage than the actual loss. People make worse decisions afraid than they do broke." The bread arrived. It was, Sophia noted, warm. She broke off a piece and set it in front of her and looked at him. "I don't know what this is," she said plainly. "I want to be honest about that." "It's dinner," he said. "It's dinner," she agreed. But, he allowed. She looked at the bread. "I've spent 11 years building something that required me to be alone, and I got very good at being alone. It stopped feeling like a cost and started feeling like a," she searched for the word, "advantage. Fewer variables, fewer leverages. And now I'm not sure the math was right," she said. "I think I was doing the calculation correctly, but starting from the wrong assumption." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the restaurant was warm and loud, and entirely uninterested in either of them, which was a remarkable relief. The couple at the table beside them were arguing cheerfully about whether to split a dessert. The waiter was explaining the pasta specials with the confidence of someone who had explained them 1,000 times and still believed in them. The world was occupied with itself, in the most ordinary, sustaining way. "Lily asked me this morning if I was meeting a friend," he said. "What did you say?" "I said I wasn't sure yet." Sophia looked at him. "And now?" He picked up his menu, looked at it, then set it back down with the slight smile of someone who had not actually been reading it. "I think the answer is yes," he said. "If that works." "That works," she said. The waiter arrived. They ordered. The bread was assessed, and a brief internal report was filed for Lily, crusty outside, soft inside, adequately warm. It passed. This seemed to settle something in Daniel's posture that had not been fully settled before. And Sophia noticed it the way she noticed most things. Precisely, with a small private admission that she found it genuinely pleasant. The candle on the table moved slightly in a draft from the door opening and closing, and in the warm, displaced light of it, Sophia Calloway smiled not, the composed, deployed smile of Meridian, and its 43rd floor, and its amber lights and its careful audiences. Something much less produced. Something that had not been arranged in advance, had not been chosen for its effect, and required nothing from anyone in the room except the person it was given to. He saw it. He did not comment on it, which was exactly right. It was a beginning, not a contract, not a strategy, not a whisper in a crowded room that everyone freezes to hear, delivered between strangers under the amber lights of a place where people perform their own importance for audiences made of mirrors. Just a beginning, the kind that starts without a plan and does not announce itself. The kind that arrives the way the bread arrived, warm, without ceremony, precisely what it was. Outside, the city continued its business. The 43rd floor of Harrington Tower was occupied with other people's negotiations now. Winston Garfield was, at this moment, drafting a revised strategy in a conference room somewhere. And Bernard Crane was advising caution in measured tones, and the whole architecture of power and leverage, and carefully arranged documents, was reorganizing itself around the new fact of a woman who had stopped reading for the wrong thing. These things would continue. They always did. The work of people who needed to take what others had built was patient and iterative, and never entirely done. But neither was the work of people who knew what they were protecting and why. And in a small Italian restaurant on the east side, Daniel Hayes was telling Sophia Calloway about the second best documented fact concerning emperor penguins, which was, according to Lily Hayes, that they stand together in groups to stay warm, trading places so the ones on the outside cycle inward, so that no single penguin has to bear the cold alone for longer than its share. She makes this argument, Daniel said, that it's the single most rational social system in existence. She has supporting evidence. She cited the book. She cited the page number. "How does a 7-year-old know about page numbers as citations?" Sophia said. "She's been watching me work," he said. "Apparently I cite page numbers when I'm making a point." Sophia looked at him across the table. The candle moved. The restaurant was loud and warm, and entirely uninterested in either of them. "No," she said. "She's not wrong at all." She broke off another piece of bread. The evening stretched ahead of them with the particular quality of evenings that carry no agenda, no clauses to find, no booths to navigate, no rooms to read strategically for hidden mechanisms and buried intentions. Just two people, a table, a candle that moved when the door opened, and the warm indifference of a room that was occupied with its own business, and wanted nothing from either of them, except the quiet permission to continue doing so. The candle steadied. The bread was warm. Lily was right about the penguins.